I'm coming in here today to talk a little bit about psychoanalysis and a psychoanalytic explanation for populism and fascism on an individual and societal level. Since the second rising of Trump, I've been in a state of existential anxiety and confusion at my own levels of denial and fear, wanting to engage in learning that I felt I'd only done intermittently. And maybe this is bad, but feeling super motivated in a way I never have to read more than ever about not just like politics, but theory that helps me understand our moment in history a bit more. I attended a lecture by the brilliant psychoanalyst Coline Covington in 2022 through the New York Psychoanalytic Institute. This was virtual, and I had done courses there in residency. And I remember just being blown away. Like, I never felt so engaged in a lecture of this kind and felt it was so relevant to the world we were living in. And I actually just found out, and I had always been meaning, by the way, to buy her books, learn more about her. I found out she died basically less than a year after that lecture, but she offered us so much while she was here. And a lot of that was insights into, as many great thinkers explored these ideas of, from Hannah Arendt to Timothy Snyder to Frantz Fanon. How do we understand humans turning to fascism in moments of challenge and rupture and fear? And why do some people do that? And why do some people fight and advocate for human goodness and decency and justice? So in one of her books, For Goodness Sake, she explores these ideas of bravery, patriotism, and identity and understanding the psychological regression, as she theorizes, that leads to populism. And throughout the book, so I just want to chat a little bit about this book, and I encourage you all to read it, but I just loved some of the ideas in it. That people seek a charismatic, all-powerful dictator to make choices for them in moments when they are facing uncertainty and change, because they want security and certainty, and they want to recreate an idealized past that they imagine they have lost, but really never existed. And here we're defining populism as, just so we're on the same page, a political movement or group that claims to represent the people and are anti-establishment, anti-elite, protectionist in their economic policies and beliefs, are anti-immigration and anti-globalization, and nationalistic, and they favor authoritarians. So we see now, and Covington was commenting on this years ago, 2022 was years ago, but she wrote this book before and has written other books before this, about how really since 2008 and 9 and the financial crisis, we see people slowly moving away from democracies that they feel have failed to them, or at least some segment of people. And we're at a turning point in which we might slip into fascism. And really the way to prevent this is to resist the fantasies of the past, accept the loss and change and fear that we're facing, and have the bravery to think for ourselves, to problem solve real solutions to problems rather than defensive escapes. Who decides in moments of rising populism and fascism, or in moments of atrocities or moments of just terror, to be brave, right? And Covington really breaks this down, that if you look at people who are rescuers, let's say for the Las Vegas massacre, for example, the people who put their lives at risk or who took brave steps never considered their helping actions to be a choice. They grew up with this innate moral compass, and they didn't consider themselves to be heroes. They were in fact guilty that they had not done more. So in the face of atrocities, we see that if we're defining bravery, it's we see brave individuals risk their lives, stand up, voice dissent, and bravery comes from their innate moral code, which is tied to their sense of self. or advocating for voicing dissent and advocating for what they believe to be right, they're not only affirming the humanity of the others, they feel as if they're affirming their own humanity and helping the continuation of the world, the continuation of the self. And we can see even in psychoanalysis that we can have these internal acts of bravery when we face the feelings or, challenges we've repressed. We don't simply continue to be ruled by our persecutory superego. We bear what feels incredibly painful and unbearable. We're no longer overriding our own feelings, our own judgments. We're assessing if external reality makes sense with our internal perception. Like, how do we actually feel? What do we actually believe? And so much of what we see in people giving over to populism, to factionalism, to black and white thinking, to tribalism, is an unwillingness to bear what is painful, and also a giving over of the self, a unwillingness to sit with uncertainty and pain, to really, rather than defend, deny, or disavow, being willing to look at your own feelings, to look at what you really think. We challenge the beliefs we've grown up with, or internalized from maybe dysfunctional environments. We decide that we will face the fear of change, which we think might destroy us, destroy relationships, mean we're going to lose love. And hopefully within therapy, we can mitigate this insecurity and fear. So, by the way, all of these are the sort of the theories that Covington is bringing forth of how we can connect the individual journey to society's journey. Dissent and rebellion, right, is very much part of bravery. It's an act of self-agency. Otherwise, if we're not willing to be brave in dissent, we're remaining in a system that's distorted, as Covington says, denying reality, ignoring dehumanization, and ignoring our own true feelings. Those who fail to be brave will often say things like, I didn't want to get involved. It wouldn't have made a difference. It's not about us. This is involving us. And these are really reflective of just defenses against our own feelings, denial, splitting, and they alienate us from ourselves. Then Covington gets into ideas of, okay, well, what makes a good citizen? Being a citizen has certain obligations, but it also has certain protections, rights, and relative security, and also endows you with a certain recognition of your humanity. So in democracy, freedom is through individual choice and ability to equally potentially govern, and in autocracies, the state is the symbol of freedom and protection, and citizenship means ideological loyalty and adherence to the group. So it's interesting that we learn a lot in America about various qualities of a good citizen and sacrifice. And wouldn't it be great if in education we learned about the very important role of questioning our state in societies that tend towards or get caught up in fascism, right? That's because the idea of what a good citizen is has become perverted. For Nazis and Hutu citizens that committed genocide, they're behaving, they felt like, to uphold group belonging, identity, but really they're conforming to some perverted ideals. He also touches on the idea of the stateless person and what it means then, if we're talking about what it means to be a good citizen, how do we face change when we leave our country, how do we face change within our own country. Someone who's stateless is considered a true outsider and a real threat to the group, because we're reminded of the loss that we could face, that expulsion is possible, basically almost like a kind of death. And we coalesce against this outsider, who we deem a criminal, to strengthen group identity. And the outsider has to be demonized as a criminal, so to create a cohesive narrative that leaves us clean and lets us continue to belong, and the outsider just needs to be expelled to get rid of the problem, the pollution. Then we look at the ideas of patriotism, or Covington does, and we read her brilliant work, and distinguishing between patriotism and what that even means and nationalism. So patriotism ideally would be a love of the morals, and hopefully sacred values of one's country, while nationalism is about putting one's countries first above all. The basic ideas that led to the American Revolution were that people felt oppressed by English rule, rigid social classes, monarchy, and they wanted to create, which is radical at the time, this idea of a society of equal men, certain equal men. And this idea of America and its dream was based on the freedom to prosper, to be socially mobile, to have justice and fairness and possibility of individual success. So those are kind of the ideological underpinnings of what we see as America and the basis of our patriotism, the ideas we hold to. So democracy, society of individuals, and a fascist totalitarian regime sort of values the whole above the individual. That is a feature of fascism, it's more like the denigration of the individual. Patriotism or its ideals can be manipulated to these extreme extents, and that there's so much about this idea of patriotism that requires that when it's manipulated can become blind belief. And atrocities arise in this context, in following these new perverted ideals that killing others is justified, and not doing so would mean being overpowered and exterminated yourself. And I think we see this in lots of contexts, even currently happening right now in the world, where we see atrocities being committed, that people believe they are right in doing this, that it's justified, and that it will prevent their own demise as a society or group. The current collapse of our political beliefs, as Covington theorizes, and a lot of people do, is in the context of globalization, rising wealth gaps, a leveling off of the post-World War II growth and expansion of social welfare, and with the financial crisis of 2008. So outside the coffee shop I'm working, I wanted to add that I recently listened to one of many podcasts I listened to featuring Rory Stewart, the great British thinker and former politician, who I find really fascinating, well-informed. So obviously Covington is coming at these issues from like a particular psychoanalytic framework, but I like listening to someone like Rory Stewart, who has this other view from the position of a politician and global thinker. And he also mentioned, you're not just thinking about rising wealth gaps and the effects of failed immigration policies, but also the backlash against disastrous wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the backlash against that, and social media exacerbating so many aspects of how we think and break into tribes, how we tend toward black and white thinking, how we lose nuance, and how we want instant gratification. An erosion in the confidence in a Western democratic system, growing distrust in government, and the move to populism to restore stability by enforcing national boundaries, consolidating national identities, retreating into a fantasy of the past that is familiar, not having to create a new identity or change, not having to face change. So, under the threat of losing the known identity of the group looks for a leader to carry the illusion of restoring this identity, bearing the anxiety of the group, taking away dissonance, finding a leader that represents total power and omnipotence, someone who can make them magically rich and powerful and maintain unity in this sort of narcissistic illusion. So really, going back to the idea of patriotism to close out this idea, sacred values can serve as inspirations for repair in times of corruption and oppression. And Covington talks about belief and dissent, and finding self-agency, two sort of main final concepts in her book. If we look at why dissent is important, we see whistleblowers, conscientious objectors saying no. Dissent can arise like in an individual context when you dissent against toxic, long-held beliefs in yourself, or and things that are happening in society and in your country that are wrong. You can see even on an individual level, it's essential to our individual personal relationships. Having the freedom to question things, to disagree, to differentiate what is right and wrong for us, to find our own psychic truth. And internal dissent may mean not falling into denial or dismissiveness. And then on a larger level, we see dissent amongst, say, a whistleblower who acts on their own conscience. And it's not supposed to be self-glorifying, but it's intended to bring abuses to light and restore moral order. And we are unwilling to hear dissent, right? Let's say within a family system, that means we are sort of enabling perhaps the oppressor of that system, or invalidating the one who is dissenting. And on a larger level, if we do nothing and ignore dissent, we're maintaining the illusion of democracy and health, and reinforcing the power of the oppressive oligarchy. We see psychoanalysis as working to allow the internal whistleblower to function, to expose defensive mechanisms that one developed when you were young to survive in dysfunctional environments, and to challenge defenses that inhibit your development and your ability to think for oneself. And when we silence dissent, right, that's often something we see in the context of fascism. People can be made to slowly accept the erosion of their rights and to not dissent. Nazi Germany and the killing of the Social Democrats, that people shrug one's shoulders and speak of the unavoidable, if regrettable, side effects of any revolution, point to the strict discipline and explain that public law and order were being maintained. So rationalizations allow terror to be normalized. We see with the Nazis that people went from this sense of like danger and despair to futility, to resignation, to detachment and dissociation. It's a slow psychic death. And then if we really understand, right, what this retreat into populism means, we are seeing this larger reaction to cognitive dissonance about the place you thought you had in society as a group, growing wealth gaps, having to grapple with loss of industries, larger anxieties about quality of life, but also identity anxiety, about what defines you and your security and safety. Some will retreat into this nostalgic past, want to make America great again, to rebel against the system they perceive failed them, and turn to systems of greater security, to a charismatic and powerful leader who offers security, a greater future, if you offer total loyalty. And ambivalence, painful ambivalence, is dispelled through splitting. So the enemy outside, the outsider, the criminal, carries negative projections of the group, and therefore the group is strengthened and pure. It's like a regressive retreat, as Covington theorizes, of almost like climbing back into the mother's womb, the autocrat's womb, where no thought is required, no anxiety or responsibility is felt. But you can't develop, you can't have new thought, you can't dissent, you can't adapt, you can't have individual thought, and you're left mindless. This retreat into fantasy denies reality, denies, as Camus would say, 2 + 2 = 4. And you can't imagine actual solutions to problems. You can't adapt, and ultimately you can't survive. Dissent protects our capacity for this thought and to resist lies. And finally, if we think about these times of change and loss, just understanding how powerful the imagined, idealized past really is. This backlash of apocalyptic nationalism, as Covington says. Things like xenophobia, machismo, racial purity theories, fake news, and interference with the press that decreases the power of the press to challenge the state. This illusion that the state is self-sufficient. A attitude towards immigrants that is impossible, where they're always a threat. They're either leeches that depend on our limited resources, or they're upstarts who take opportunities from us. We either resent them or we envy them. And also the elements of othering, racism, evidence of the dangers of the global others. And really see in the context of all of this distorted anxiety and uncertainty, it's hard to think clearly and it's easy to be manipulated, especially those who feel as if this is a moment of existential threat that threatens their survival. As Timothy Snyder says, the seduction of a mythicized past prevents us from thinking about possible futures. The mythicized past also banishes any pain, and when we are unwilling to face the truth of pain, we turn towards something distorted. Covington concludes, every act of bravery is an act of self-agency, and therefore a political act, that when we defend another's life, we also defend our own. We are defending decency, and we are resisting destructiveness. We are preserving goodness. So we have a responsibility to goodness that binds us to each other, that can be the core driver of our patriotism. And we'll end on this. Populist autocracies gain ascendancy in the world, and truth and dissent are silenced. We need to be especially vigilant in guarding against the cowardice of inaction and complicity that costs us our conscience, our countries, and ultimately our lives. But we see that this is a fight that needs to happen. Right? We may be in a situation where a protest that asserts 2 and 2 make 4, as Camus writes, then becomes a fight to the death. Where we fight distortions for truth and justice.